Top 20 lesbian movie tropes. In my research on lesbian and queer female movie tropes, I have come across quite a few. Some that are quite recognizable, others that are a bit more obscure, others again blending more into or paralleling general LGBT tropes, but all of them relevant and all of them a part of the history of lesbian representation in film. I did narrow it down to the top 20 that cover the most essential ones, the most common and the most harmful. I did add in an extra one just for fun, because why not? So really it's a list of 21 tropes now. If I have left any out that you believe should have been included, I apologize in advance. The ones that I have included are in no particular order: queerbaiting, homoerotic subtext, queer coding, lipstick lesbian, erasure, straight washing, shameful secret, the lesbian affair, psycho lesbian, lesbian predator, punish the lesbian, left for a man, gulpolitis, lesbians only hold hands, Less-ploitation, dead lesbian syndrome, women behind bars, school scandal, supernatural temptress, blonde brunette, and lesbian named Lena. Many of these tropes apply as general LGBT tropes in film as well, but for the purpose of my review series, which will focus on lesbian themes, I'll be approaching them more from the queer female perspective. Many of them have official titles or names you would have already readily recognized. Others are a bit more vague or undefined, in which case I have attempted to identify them as best as I could. So these are the top 20 that I was able to find. Queerbaiting. The definition of queerbaiting in film is essentially portrayal of a same-sex romantic relationship through subtext without actually following through with the relationship on screen. It is generally a ploy used to draw in the queer audience without alienating the more conservative straight audience. Queerbaiting can be as basic as two girls flirting with each other on screen, sharing an intimate moment that can be interpreted as platonic, romantic, or comedic, or even kissing, but usually for shock value. However, as LGBT representation within the entertainment industry continues to become more and more generally accepted, and as it grows and evolves, the nature of queerbaiting likewise evolves and changes. For example, nowadays we might get legitimate same-sex couples or queer characters. However, their screen time portraying intimacy or expressing their sexuality is usually limited or obscured by the lighting or camera angles, things like that, in comparison to their heterosexual counterparts. So we might get something like two girls sharing a peck on the lips, while their scene then cuts onto a full-blown sex scene between two straight characters. Homoerotic subtext, subtle attraction or tension between same-sex characters, often depicted through dialogue, body language, or behavior, such as brushing each other's hair, helping each other get dressed, sharing the shower, sleeping in the same bed, having pillow fights, which on the surface may not appear sexual in nature. And while the characters could very well be platonic friends, the history of homoerotic subtext is loaded with undertones of censored homosexuality. Not entirely unlike queerbaiting, homoerotic subtext is often present in the story as a way of giving a nod to the queer audience or hinting that the characters may be queer while retaining the more conservative audience. But unlike queerbaiting, which is often a deliberate marketing ploy, in the days of the Hays Code and stricter LGBT censorship in film, homoerotic subtext was often the only way in which storytellers were also able to get any semblance of homosexuality past the censorship and the general audience. It was often their only way of sneaking in the authenticity of the queer characters or queer experiences that they wanted to portray in their movie. Queer coding. Queer coding is used for hinting or suggesting that a character may be queer, often through their appearance, their dress sense, mannerisms, or general self-expression without explicitly referencing their sexuality. Think of every time you've seen a straight female character put on a tuxedo and do her hair really smooth and slicked back, or put on more masculine clothing or androgynous clothing, even if just for show. However, while protagonists can be queer-coded, this trope has a history of being utilized on villains far more than is warranted. The downside of that being the connotation that queerness goes hand in hand with questionable or warped moral qualities. Lipstick lesbian. While female queer coding is usually utilized through the expression of the androgynous or butch lesbian stereotype in supposedly straight characters, the flip side of this trope is the lipstick lesbian trope, which means if there is a female character who is portrayed as actually lesbian or queer, she is usually depicted as conventionally feminine. And while in real life there absolutely are lesbian and queer women who are conventionally feminine, there are also those who are not, those who are more masculine presenting or more gender neutral presenting. However, for some reason, when it comes to the queer female portrayal in film, there is an overwhelming portrayal of the feminine lesbian, of the conventionally feminine lesbian, the lipstick lesbian, particularly if she has a bigger role to play. So why is there a lack of solid butch lesbian representation or gender neutral queer female representation in mainstream film? Most likely because the lipstick lesbian is perceived as less intimidating to the mainstream audience, while also appearing more conventionally attractive and appealing to that same audience, particularly the straight male demographic. Erasure. Bisexual erasure. A character who is portrayed as having sexual relationships of homosexual and heterosexual nature, but are inaccurately referred to as straight or lesbian in the film, with the word bisexual omitted altogether. This also includes instances where characters who are known to be bisexual have a portion of their sexuality omitted or excluded from the story and are instead portrayed as either heterosexual or gay in practice, remaining bisexual only in theory. Straightwashing. Straightwashing is an erasure of an already established queer character's or real-life personality's queer identity and replacing it with heterosexuality in film. In this case, film adaptations of other source material such as books or real-life people or events might portray the characters or personalities who are known to be queer as straight or straight-seeming for the purpose of making the film marketable to the mainstream audience. Shameful secret. This is the portrayal of a character's queerness as something shameful or generally negative, something that warrants being kept hidden either by the queer person themselves who struggles accepting their own sexuality, or by those around them who likewise struggle to accept the person as they are. Their sexuality is treated as an aberration, and there is often a painful unfolding that follows in the film, which really could go either way, resulting in either the ultimate punishment, which is death, or eventual acceptance, though not without much turmoil first. And while this trope is a direct reflection of people's experiences of being gay or queer in real life, of coming out, of other people's reactions, the persistent portrayal of homosexuality as something shameful, as something difficult and heavy, as something to struggle with, contributes to the general tone of pain and struggle for the LGBT community in the real world. The lesbian affair. This is an all too common stereotype in film depicting lesbians, where a woman in a heterosexual relationship or marriage is bored, unhappy, finds relief and momentary happiness, or at the very least a distraction, in an affair with another woman. Psycho-lesbian. A woman whose same-sex attraction is coupled with her psychotic tendencies, often becoming intensely single-mindedly focused on the object of her desire, or using the relationship with another woman for her own warped personal gain. These characters range from obsessive, stalkerish, manipulative, corrupt, aggressive, or homicidal, and are often shown to use their sexuality as a means of manipulation or specifically as the cause of their malignant behavior. Lesbian predator. This trope may overlap with the psycho-lesbian trope, but it doesn't have to. The similarity between the two is a queer female character who is portrayed in a negative light, often as sexually aggressive, with her sexuality intertwined with her corrupt behavior. But while a psycho-lesbian is treated more as a general psychopath who exploits her sexuality as a means of obtaining whatever it is she's wanting to obtain, the lesbian predator is portrayed more as a pervert, as a direct result of her sexuality. This type of character is usually portrayed as being older or in some kind of position of power or more experienced in lesbianism, who then attempts to seduce the younger, heterosexual, virtuous woman, thus corrupting her innocence by converting her. The advances of the lesbian predator are portrayed as unwanted, often having the other woman appear to be repulsed or disgusted by the behavior in the beginning, before eventually being swayed to give in due to no fault of her own and not exactly of her own volition, thus resolving her of responsibility for the homosexuality imposed. Punish the lesbian. In this trope, a lesbian or female woman-loving character who refuses to give up her sexuality or repent for it is punished for it in some capacity. Likewise, for a lesbian couple who despite all odds choose to stay together, tragedy follows. On the flip side, in the case of two women in a relationship that is doomed because of whatever circumstances, the woman who turns away from the relationship more convincingly and subsequently goes down the heterosexual path receives salvation and appears to be generally better off, while the other woman who refuses to atone for her immoral sexuality but remains more readily true to her nature, suffers heartbreak, loss, and other generally horrible, painful things by comparison. Left for a man. This trope often goes hand in hand with the previous trope of punish the lesbian. A lesbian couple is disrupted and torn apart, most often by external pressure, where one of them leaves the other to be in a heterosexual relationship because it is more socially acceptable or morally correct. Galpalitis. So this sounds like a disease or a virus, but it's not. Or it might as well be, really, if you think about it. This is the trope where two queer female characters who are portrayed to be in a covert relationship with each other, could even be portrayed to be living together, have to hide their relationship and pretend to be only roommates or good friends in front of other people out of fear of being ostracized or punished. Likewise, it is heteronormativity in practice, where oblivious heterosexual characters around them are portrayed to be clueless to the lesbian relationship, often referring to the women as close friends or gal pals. Lesbians only hold hands. This is a trope where a canonically lesbian couple is portrayed as not too gay, as a way of being less invasive or offensive in a mainstream movie. A lesbian couple may be stated to be exactly that, a couple, but in terms of physical affection, they are shown to only exchange a longing glance here and there, maybe share a gentle kiss or even hold each other's hand, but generally nothing more, out of fear of alienating the audience, while the heterosexual couples in the same movie receive more complete affectionate or even sexual depiction of their relationship. Less-ploitation. On the opposite extreme to lesbians only hold hands trope, we have the glorious world of lesbian exploitation in film. By definition, sexploitation films are movies that serve as a medium for cheap stories that depict non-explicit sex scenes and gratuitous nudity, most often female nudity. Less-ploitation, likewise, is the exploitation of lesbianism through female nudity and gratuitous sex scenes involving two or more women in scenarios designed to cater to a mainly male audience. It is a more extreme form of the male gaze that deliberately exploits the queer female sexuality. Dead lesbian syndrome. This is a subgenre of the bury your gaze trope, specifically focused on the death of queer female characters, most often shortly after the consummation of a lesbian relationship. Lesbian and otherwise queer female characters seldom get to experience a happy ending and are often met with the most severe type of tragedy as punishment for their moment of happiness that directly ties to their sexuality. And while death of virtually any type of character in film is not unusual, a high rate of lesbian character death in proportion to the overall percentage of films depicting lesbian content in general is quite heavily skewed. Until there is more fair and positive portrayal of queer female characters in film and LGBT characters in film overall, it is not unreasonable to label this trope as one of the most harmful out there and ask for better representation. While we have moved quite a bit forward in terms of representation for our community, and while some people might say that you can't stop every single LGBT death in a movie, there is still a great debt owed to the LGBT community in what was done before. So we're not there yet, and LGBT deaths should still be avoided, in my opinion. Women behind bars. The purpose of the women in prison trope is to provide the perfect canvas, the perfect background and excuse for any one or even multiple of the previously mentioned tropes to play out. The women's prison in film is virtually a wonderland for any kind of stereotypical lesbian trope activity, from homoeroticism and queer-coded characters to lesbian affairs, lesbian predators, to psycho-lesbians, to lesbians who share longing glances or covertly hold hands through the bars of their jail cells, all the while suffering from gulpulitis, and all before engaging in a healthy dose of less-ploitation. School scandal. Unlike some of the previous examples, the school scandal trope involves virtually any storyline set in an educational institution where a female's queer sexuality is treated as something shocking or inappropriate, provoking a scandal within the establishment with heavy penalty for the culprits. This could go along the lines of a rumor about a student's sexuality, a rumor about a teacher's sexuality, or it could be an actual relationship between two students or between two female teachers, or even a relationship between a teacher and a student. Supernatural temptress. A female presenting character with supernatural abilities, an extraordinary being that's not quite human, such as a vampire, sorceress, witch, mermaid, or even alien, uses her powers which, lo and behold, amplify not only her beauty and sex appeal, but also her sexuality. She tempts and seduces otherwise perfectly innocent and usually heterosexual maidens because, of course, for a woman to be interested in another woman sexually, she would have had to have been glamored and seduced into it. There is no way she'd go down this path of ill morals out of her own free will. Blonde brunette. This one is not so much a harmful trope as it is just a bit of an amusing stereotype. For some reason in Western cinema, if there's a lesbian pairing, it's usually between a blonde woman and a brunette, and I can't really figure out why. The closest I've come to an explanation is that with two women on the screen and the lack of a man and that whole male-female physical contrast thing, It's easy to confuse lesbian A with lesbian B since they're both female and therefore obviously must look identical. So let's switch up their hair color as a way of being able to tell them apart. I don't know, I made that up. I don't know, I have no idea. It's just something interesting to keep an eye on, just something I've noticed and others have noticed. And lastly, a bonus trope. Lesbian called Lena. Okay, so this is not actually a trope at all, nor a stereotype. This is something I made up because it is my firm belief that it should be a trope. Why? Well, why not? I do know that in the movie Summer there is a character called Lena, and also in All Cheerleaders Die there is this really cute witch who's a lesbian. She's also called Lena. But anyway, it should totally be a thing in film. Are there any other ones that I don't know about? If you do know, you can let me know, because if there are, I want to see them. And also, while doing these reviews, I'm totally giving whatever movie has this trope extra points. So yeah, but this is just for laughs because life's too short anyways. So that's it. That's the top 20 lesbian tropes in movies, and this is the commencement of my review series. And how I'm going to be doing this is that with every trope that is present in a movie from these 20, I'm going to deduct 5 points from the film. So if they have every single trope present, they're going to lose 5 points each. 5 times 20, what is that? That's 100. They lose 100 points. But if they deliberately manage to subvert any of these tropes, then they will gain 5 points. If there is just a lack of a trope, then that doesn't count. However, if they do have a lesbian called Lena, I don't know, I'm gonna give them 50 points. Because alliteration.